hope the screen is visible. So we will start with the second module, which is related with compilers, and this is the textbook which is there for your reference. It's called as Compilers, Principles, Techniques and Tools by Aho and Ullman, right? So this is the textbook. I'll share you this PDF file. You can use it for reference, and of course there are PPTs, but of course for the first unit or the first chapter from this compilers we will refer this textbook. Okay, for the remaining we can refer the PPT. So this is second edition available. Of course the content are almost similar, so you need not worry. If you get a latest version, then that is also fine. Okay, straight away. I hope nobody is trying to join because I will not be able to give admit. Okay. Right, we'll start with the introduction of compiler, right? So we already seen one type of system software, which is the assembler. So basically assembler was there to convert assembly level language program to machine language, right? So basically assembler does the job of translation. A similar program exists for performing the translation from high level language to machine level language, and that software or that program is actually called as a compiler, right? So let us look at the definition of compiler. So basically a compiler is a program that can read a program in one language, which we call it as a source language, and translate it into an equivalent program in another language, and we call it as a target language. So diagrammatically, if we look into that, it will look something like this. So we have compiler, which is a program itself, and this program accepts another program which you call it as source program. Now this program can be written in high level language, and it accepts that program and translates that particular program into another program which you call it as a target program. Now source program and target program are completely written in different languages, right? For example, this can be a program in high level language like C or C++ or Java, whatever, and this can be a program written in machine language. Normally the target program would be a machine language program, right? So if the target program is an executable machine language program, then it can then be used by the user to process input and produce the output. So when the target program is executed, for that particular target program you give the input, and whatever input you have given, based on that input the target program is going to produce the output. So this will happen when you run that particular target program which is produced by the compiler. Okay. Now a similar kind of program exists which is called as an interpreter, almost similar to compiler. It is called as an interpreter, but the working of interpreter is completely different from that of the compiler. Okay. So an interpreter is another kind of language processor, you can say. We're calling it as language processors because they are dealing with different kinds of languages, or they are processing different kinds of languages, right? Now what the interpreter does, now the interpreter, instead of producing a target program as a translation or as output, it will directly execute the operations specified in the source program on the inputs that are supplied by the user. Okay, so what does it mean? So our compiler will produce a target program. So this will be stored on your computer, and then later that particular target program can be executed. But here the interpreter directly takes the input from the user along with the source program, and it will execute the program, or it will execute the operations that are specified in your source program for that particular input. Okay, or directly it will produce the output. So this is the job of the interpreter, one another type of language processor which you have actually seen. Okay, now what are the major differences? The major differences being that compiler, whatever output it produces, that has storage in storage occupied, or it will have stored on the machine, but here direct execution is going to take place. Okay, so this is one of the major difference. The other difference, somebody is trying to join, I don't know. Okay, the other difference is in terms of where and how it can be applied. So the machine program that is produced by the compiler is usually faster than the uh, program that is produced by the interpreter, okay, at mapping inputs and output. Okay, why? Because here things happen line by line. So obviously it would take some time, whereas here the job is already done. So quite obvious that it is much more faster. So a compiled program is much more faster than an interpreted program. Okay, that is one of the advantage. So another major difference between an interpreter and the compiler is the way diagnostic messages are given. So interpreter is way better in giving diagnostic messages than the compiler, because it executes the source program statement by statement. Okay? That is one of the major advantage of using an interpreter. So majority of the time the interpreter is used in places where development is a criteria. Okay, so this is about the interpreter. Now some programming languages like Java actually uses both of them. Okay, they use both compilation process also, and they use interpretation process also. Okay, I believe you are familiar with this, because Java programming language is both interpreted as well as compiled, right? So it's somewhat like an hybrid compiler. So the compiler, what it does is it will take the source program as input, it will translate that to an intermediate program. So that intermediate program, is going to take the input from the user, and it would be executed on a virtual machine. So this virtual machine will execute this intermediate program line by line, as we have discussed in case of interpreter, and it will produce the output. Okay, now in case of Java, this intermediate program is called as a bytecode, right? So this bytecode is stored on the computer system, and this is what gives that independency, okay, or machine independency to to Java programming language. Okay, so this is what. Uh, Now, as I said, the Java programming language is both compiled as well as interpreted, because the first source program is going to get compiled and produces an intermediate program or bytecode, which occupies memory on your computer system. Now, this can be ported anywhere, and it can be executed on any machine that has a Java virtual machine or JVM installed in it. Okay, so that JVM is going to interpret this particular bytecode along with the input from the user and produces the output. So Java becomes a both compiled as well as interpreted program. Okay. Now along with compiler and interpreter, we have other system softwares also as a part of language processing system. Okay, we are talking about language processors. So in case of language processor, we have seen compiler is one such program that can do the translation, and we have also seen an interpreter, which is also capable of converting your source program into target program. But along with that, we also need the help of other system softwares or other programs which can help in the translation. Okay. Now, what are those scenarios in which they can be helped? So one such scenario is when a source program may be divided into modules and stored in separate places. Okay. So like for example, you have header files or you have library functions which are stored and written separately, okay, in your system. So the task of collecting the source program is sometimes entrusted to a separate program called as a preprocessor. So a preprocessor basically expands all the shorthand notations, which we call it as macros, into the source language statements. Okay, like for example, whatever you have written before a C program, like hash include stdio.h, hash define something, right? So all those things are going to be handled by those things are called as macros, and a program that actually processes them is actually called as a macro processor. Okay, or in this case we call it as a preprocessor. Why we call it as a preprocessor? Because before the compilation, this job will be done, or this type of processing is going to be done. What type of processing? So processing majorly involves expanding all the shorthands or all the macros. So whatever macro you have written, so those macros are going to be expanded by this program called as a preprocessor, right? So once the pre-processing is done, then that particular program or the modified program is fed to the compiler, which will obviously generate the next output, which is the assembly level language program, which is, as I mentioned, sometimes a compiler may not directly produce an object program. It will generate an assembly level language program. So once the assembly level language program has been generated, so that would become easier for the next program, which is nothing but the assembler, to handle and generate the machine code for it. Okay, so this is one thing. Now, once the machine code is generated, obviously there might be scenarios where we come across relocatable code or relocatable machine code, which we have already discussed about. Sometimes the assembler can produce a relocatable program, and there can be different programs that might have to be linked together, right? So in this case, our next system software in hand, which is the linker and the loader, comes into picture. So what is the job of the linker? The linker basically resolves the external references or external memory references where the code in the one file may refer to location in another file. Okay, so this is completely the concept of control sections that we have already discussed about. Okay, what is the job of the loader then? The job of the loader is to load or put together all the executable object files into memory for execution, right? Now these are all the programs that actually helps you to process a program that is written in high level language and run on your machine as machine level language. So if you put all of these together, the language processing system would look something like this. Okay, as shown in the figure, the language processing system would look something like this, right? So you can observe here, we have the source program, which is written in high level language. So first there will be some sort of pre-processing or expansion of macros done by preprocessor. So you get a modified source program or an expanded program, you can say. So this expanded program is then given as an input to compiler, and that compiler will translate that program into a target assembly program. Okay. Now this assembler is going to generate the relocatable machine code, so which is then linked and loaded into the machine for execution as target machine code. Now during this process, our linker and loader may also refer certain library files or relocatable object programs as mentioned in the program. Okay, so this is about the language processing system, right? So we have the preprocessor, we have the compiler, we have the assembler, linker, as well as the loader. Together they will process a particular source program into a target program, right? Now we shall look at the structure of the compiler. So we have seen that compiler is basically a program that will perform the translation, right? Now during this translation, what are all the different stages involved in translating the program into assembly level language? Okay, we will assume that from now our compiler is going to translate into machine language only, right? Okay. So, yeah. So when we look into the structure of the compiler, we will divide it into two different parts. Okay, we'll divide it into two different parts. So the first part basically does analysis, and the second part basically does synthesis. Okay, so it does analysis and it does synthesis. Okay, these are the two things. Now what do you mean by analysis, or what do you mean by synthesis? So the analysis part would actually break up the source program into constituent pieces and impose a grammatical structure on them. So this is what the analysis part does. Okay, so it would break up the program into its constituent pieces, and it will perform or it will impose grammatical structure on it, or it will analyze it grammatically. Whatever part it has broken down, it will analyze it grammatically. So then it will use this particular structure to create intermediate representation of the source program. Okay, so this is the job of the analysis part. So first it will break down the program, analyze it grammatically, and then it would represent that in an intermediate representation. Now during this process, if something goes wrong or if some error is detected, then the source program is either syntactically informed or semantically unsound. Okay, as nothing but if there are any error in the program, then it would actually provide diagnostic messages or informative messages in order to provide in order to give the user some corrective action. Okay, so along with that, the analysis part will also collect some information about the program, and it will store it in a data structure called as a symbol table. Now symbol table or sim tab we have already come across in case of assembler. Assembler has its own symbol table. It will store the symbol values and its information. Now the compiler also does the same thing, right? So it will have a data structure called a symbol table. It will store that information in the symbol table, and then it is going to pass the information along with the intermediate representation to the next part of the compiler, which is the synthesis part. Okay, so this is what happens in the analysis part. Okay, break down the program, analyze the program in terms of grammar. Okay, represent that using intermediate representation. So if you come across any mistakes, then provide informative messages to the user, record the information in the symbol table and pass it on along with the intermediate representation to the synthesis part. Okay, so this is the summary of what the analysis part does. Now what the synthesis part does. The synthesis part basically constructs the desired target program from that intermediate representation and the information that is given from the symbol table. Okay, so we sometimes this is it. This is the major thing that the synthesis part does. So basically, it will generate the target program using the intermediate representation. So sometimes we call the analysis part as the front end of the compiler and the synthesis part as the back end of the compiler. Okay. So now let us look into what exactly this analysis part and synthesis part is made up of in terms of the phases. Okay, so basically our compiler operates in terms of phases. Different phases are there in the compiler, and it is as shown in the diagram. Okay, we are already familiar with this phase. I had shown you in the laboratory session yesterday, not yesterday, I mean before that. So this is the phase of compiler or the structure of the compiler. Okay, so let us just look into this. I hope this is visible. So this is what it is made up of, right? So it contains around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 7 different phases are there. Basically contains two parts, or it can be divided into two parts. So up to this intermediate code generation, which covers semantic analyzer, syntax analyzer, and lexical analyzer. All of these things are part of the analysis phase. Okay, or you can also say that these are machine independent phase of the compiler. Okay, there are machine independent phase of the compiler. Okay, means these things are not dependent upon the machine or machine architecture. Okay, now the phases: machine independent code optimization, code generation, and machine dependent code optimization. Now these things are dependent on the machine. Okay, because optimization is somewhat yes, dependent on the machine architecture. So even the code generation is also dependent on the machine architecture. So these are called as machine dependent phases of a compiler because they are dependent on the machine architecture. Now along with that, in every phase the symbol table is going to be referred. So symbol table basically stores the information, right? So let us now look into each phases in detail and how these phases are responsible for converting your source program into the target machine code. Okay, now we'll assume that this target machine code is a assembly level language program, right? So we'll start with the first one, which is lexical analyzer. So this lexical analyzer takes as input a character stream. It will divide that into several tokens. Okay, it will divide it into several tokens, and it is going to produce a token stream. Okay, so this is the first job of the lexical analyzer. Now I already mentioned that lexical analysis is something like a spell check in English. So this is what is done by lexical analyzer. So it would return, or it would scan the input, it would group together a set of characters, and it will produce what they're called as tokens for our next phase of the compiler, which is called as a syntax analyzer. Okay, now as the name itself indicates, it basically verifies the syntax. So whatever tokens are returned from the lexical analyzer, so it is going to analyze the syntax as per the grammar. Okay, now one more thing I forgot to mention: lexical analysis requires regular expressions or patterns, so which are specified using regular expressions. So using those regular expressions, the lexical analyzer is going to group the set of characters into tokens. Now similarly, the syntax analyzer is going to have grammar associated with it or associated with the source program. So using that grammar, it is going to verify the syntax, okay, of the state of the source program, and then it is going to produce what is called as a syntax tree. Okay, this is the output of the syntax analyzer. So syntax analyzer produces syntax tree. Now this syntax tree is passed on to the next phase of the compiler, which analyzes the semantics. Semantics in the sense meaning associated with the tokens. Okay, and it will produce once again a syntax tree, but it is sometimes called as an annotated parse tree or syntax tree. Now another name for syntax tree is parse tree, by the way. So it will produce what is called as an annotated parse tree or a variation of the syntax tree. Okay, then using this annotated parse tree, we get enough information to produce what is called as an intermediate code of that particular source program. So this will be done by a phase of compiler called as intermediate code generator. Okay, so intermediate code generator would actually produce a intermediate representation, so which will be used by the next phase of the compiler to perform optimization. Now this might be optional, or even this might be optional, last one, but optimization is performed to carry out certain things, right? So like there are certain advantages to perform code optimization. Your code would actually execute faster, so that's the only reason. So other advantages are also there. We will discuss about what is the advantage of doing code optimization later. Okay, but intermediate representation is translated or optimized to produce optimized intermediate representation, which would then be passed on to the next phase of the compiler, which is generating the code, or it would actually generate the code. Okay, it will generate the target machine code. So in this case, we will consider this as the assembly level language program that is generated. So later, whatever code has been generated, still it could be optimized. So we call it as machine dependent code optimization by an optimizer to produce the final target machine code, okay, which is nothing but the assembly level language program that might be passed on to the next language processor in line, which is our assembler. Okay, so throughout this conversion, symbol table would be used interactively by all these phases. Okay, like lexical analyzer, as soon as it sees a token, that token can be stored in the symbol table along with other information. Okay, now whenever syntax analyzer or semantic analyzer performs some analysis, so all that information would actually go into the symbol table, which would later be used by these phases. Okay, intermediate code generator, and of course for optimization purpose. Okay, so this is how the compiler translates your program into assembly level language program or a target program. Okay, let us look into this explanation with an example. Okay, this is the same thing, same diagram, but with a statement from a source program. Okay, so let us check what is the source program statement. So source program statement is something like position is equal to initial plus rate into 60. Okay, now this is somewhat an statement that we write in a high level language, maybe a C or a C++ or Java, any high level language program. We might have a statement like this, assuming that position, initial and rate are variables. Okay, so we have this. So how does this statement get translated to assembly level language program? That is what we are supposed to look into. Okay, so okay, I hope this is visible. Okay, so the source statement is position is equal to initial plus rate into 60, right? So let's write INI plus rate into 60. Okay, this is the high level language statement. Now this statement has to be analyzed first. So what are all the, see, if this is basically an expression, correct? This is basically an expression. So this expression has to be analyzed, and the operator and the operands needs to be identified. Okay, now this is the job for the lexical analyzer. This is the job for the lexical analyzer, right? So lexical analyzer is supposed to scan this input, and it is supposed to produce a set of tokens. Okay, now we mentioned that all the position, initial and rate, so these three are nothing but variables. Okay, these things are nothing but variables. Now what are variables? Basically variables are name given to the memory location, right? Or in other words, they are nothing but identifiers, right? They are nothing but identifiers, right? So our lexical analyzer's job is to verify whether proper identifiers are used in your expression. Okay, so this is what the lexical analyzer does, right? So then it would actually give that information to the syntax analyzer to analyze the syntax. See, we have an expression here. So this expression has to be evaluated. So whether it is correct or not, that has to be evaluated as per the grammar. Okay. So grammar rule actually tells that if there is an expression, then an expression can be something like this. Okay, a plus b or something like this, or a into b into c, provided it has the knowledge of operators that are being used in the expression. Okay. So as per the grammar, the expression has to be analyzed, and to analyze the expression, it requires whether proper identifiers are present in the expression or not. Okay, or you can also say operators are present in the expressions or not. So to identify these identifiers is the first job of our lexical analyzer. Okay, how it actually does that, let us see. Okay, so let us assume that position, is it a valid identifier? Position, is it a valid identifier? Yes, it is a name, correct? And it is not a keyword. So I can also say that this is an identifier. What do you mean by an identifier, by the way? An identifier is something that begins with a letter followed by any number of letters or digit, right? So that is the definition of an identifier. So this will be available with our lexical analyzer. Okay, this will be available with our lexical analyzer. So, and if you remember, lex always goes with the longest match, right? So if you give this rule to the lexer, as per this particular rule of identifier, it has to identify that position is an identifier. Similarly, initial is an identifier. Similarly, rate is an identifier. Will it do that? Yes, it will do that. Because as per the rule, this begins with a letter followed by any number of letters or digit. In this case, we have letters. Even this one, letter followed by any number of letters, right? Of course, when a space comes in between or some other operator comes, like plus is there or star is there or equal to is there, so it would be broken down into initial, position and rate. So scan the input one character at a time, try to group them together based on this particular rule that has been specified. So our lexical analyzer is going to do that. Now when it is doing the same, when it comes across an identifier, it would actually enter those values into the symbol table. Okay, it would enter those values into the symbol table. Like for example, it will say that, okay, I have come across something which is called as position. Okay, and I have come across something which is called as initial. I have come across something which is called as rate. Now along with that, it can also put some other information which might be required for the syntax analyzer. Okay, so what might be the information? The information can be the length of the identifier or the address of the identifier, so on and so on. Okay, so what the lexical analyzer does is it will do something like this. All of these things are going to be returned as tokens to our next phase of the compiler, which is called as the syntax analyzer. Okay, and the tokens would be returned in the following format. Okay, what is the format that is followed? Okay, first the lexer tells that, okay, I have got an identifier and this is the position. Okay, or I have inserted that in the first position in the symbol table. Okay, then it says that, okay, I have seen an equal to symbol. After the equal to symbol, I have seen another identifier. Okay, another identifier. Even equal to symbol is also a token. Okay, it is written as it is because it is required in the expression. Okay, I have seen another identifier which is correct, and it is being placed in the second position. So you do whatever you want with this. Okay, then after that I had seen a plus symbol as per the input. Okay, so this is what one token, this is second token, this is the first token, second token. First token is identifier, second token identifier, then fourth token, fifth one is another identifier which is identified as a third token in the symbol table. Okay, followed by another token which looks something like a multiplication symbol, and then we have got 60. Okay, so all these tokens are returned by our lexical analyzer to our next phase of the compiler, which is the syntax analysis. Okay, so the syntax analyzer does something with this. What it does, this will produce a syntax tree or a parse tree. This will produce a syntax tree or a parse tree. Okay. Now, parse tree is an intermediate representation that would actually help the further phases of the compiler to generate the intermediate code. Okay, as the name itself indicates, the output is in a tree format. Okay, like for example, if I have A is equal to B, something like this, then I can write it in a tree format. So equal to is the operator, and this operator requires two operands. One operand is A, another operand is B. Okay, now if I write A is equal to B plus C, something like this, then our syntax tree would look something like this. Okay, just a second. Just a second. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, so suppose if the expression is something like this, then we would produce a tree like equal to. So on the left hand side, we have this. On the right hand side, we have one more expression. So obviously, that expression contains an operator. So specify the operator B and then the operand C. Okay, so this is how we would normally represent a parse tree. Okay, this is actually a variation of a parse tree. Okay, it's called a syntax tree by the way. So this is how we are going to represent it, right? Now using this information, we can also represent the above, correct? We can also represent the above as shown in the figure, right? So you can observe here. So first is equal to, on the left hand side we have got id1. On the right hand side, first we are supposed to evaluate the star. So that's why it comes at the bottom of the tree. So it has operators id3 and 60, and whatever the result is, that will be passed on to plus, and id2 would be used as another operator, will be added with the result produced from this branch. Okay, later once added, this will be assigned to id1. So this is what the parse tree actually represents. So this is the intermediate representation of the syntax analyzer. Okay, so once this syntax analyzer produces this parse tree, of course it will analyze the input or tokens as per the grammar, and if everything is correct, then it is going to produce this syntax tree. Okay, so otherwise it is not going to produce this. It will generate error messages to the user, right? So after generating the syntax tree, it would then be passed on to the next phase of the compiler, which is called as a semantic analyzer. Now semantics means meaning, verifying the meaning. Okay, now like for example, if I have a is equal to b, a statement called as a is equal to b, a is a token, b is a token, right? A is a token, b is a token, right? So as per the grammar, this sentence or the statement is correct. Okay, a is taking the value of b, or b is assigned to a. Okay, but if I give you some information prior to this, that a is an integer, okay, and b is a character. Okay, a is an integer and b is a character, then is this assignment correct? That's the next question, right? So obviously this assignment is wrong, because syntactically it is correct, but semantically it is wrong. Okay, we cannot assign a character to an integer. Even if we do, it would actually not contain the same information that b actually has. Okay, so this type of verification is called as semantic analysis. Okay, like for example, you can observe in the diagram that some form of analysis is done. Like for example, I'll assume that position, initial and rate. Okay, so rate is an integer, initial is an integer, and position is an integer. If I assume that, okay, then this expression is correct. Even if I assume that float is position, initial and rate, all of them are floating point numbers, then also this is correct. Okay, anything other than this may not be semantically correct, right? So this type of analysis is done by our semantic analyzer, right? Now while it performs this, it may also perform some sort of conversion. Like for example, you can observe here 60 has been converted to float, because position, initial, rate, all three are floating point integers, floating point numbers. 60 is an integer. Okay, of course I can multiply this with a floating point number, does not have any problem. But if I convert that to a floating point number, all of these things are going to be one and the same. Okay, so we will do a conversion of into float into 60. So this is one more operation that is performed in order to improve the code. That's it. Okay, it's not necessary, but it is just done to improve the code. So into float is done to 60. So this will be converted to 60.0. Okay, so that it will be converted to 60.0. So this is how analysis is going to be done, and it is going to be passed on to the next phase of the compiler, which is called as the intermediate code generator. Okay, now this intermediate code generator is going to produce intermediate code. So what do you mean by this intermediate code? There are different types of intermediate codes. Okay, one famous type of intermediate code is called as a 3-address code. Okay. It's called as a 3-address code, which is used by most of the compiler. Now what do you mean by this 3-address code? The 3-address code basically represents any expression using only 3 addresses, or a maximum 3 addresses. Okay, maximum 3 addresses, right? So in a statement, you can have maximum 3 addresses. That's it. Okay, like for example, if you take a is equal to b plus c. Now how will you evaluate this expression? So first you will add b plus c. Okay, then let us assume we will store it in a temporary variable. So let us call it as t1 and t1. Okay, then t1 can be assigned to a. Okay, so this is how we can write the intermediate code. Now how I wrote this intermediate code, obviously we have to discuss about 3-address code, but just understand for now that 3-address code contains maximum 3 address. Okay, like for example, t1 is an address, correct? B is an address. Similarly, C is an address, right? So how many addresses are there? 3 addresses are there. So this is a 3-address code. So here A is an address, T1 is an address. So only 2 addresses are there. Is it a 3-address code? Yes, it is, because a 3-address code can have maximum 3 addresses. Okay, like for example, if the previous statement was B plus C plus D, right? Then that is not a 3-address code, because we have got 4 address fields there. Okay, so this is what a 3-address code is, right? So let us check how to write a 3-address code for the above statement. So first of all, what has to be evaluated, right? So in the equation, the first part is that we have to convert that 60 to 60.0. So that would be our first operation. So we will write T1, first operation is convert your 60 to float. Convert your 60 to float. That's the first operation in this syntax tree. Okay, so T1 will now contain 60.0. Okay, the next operation is take that T1 and multiply that with ID 3. Okay, whatever the value of ID3 is, that is stored in the symbol table. So we take that value and multiply that and store it in one more temporary location. Now these temporary locations are nothing but registers. Okay, because you know that every operation needs to be done with the register. So we're just naming it as T1, T2 for our reference. That's it. Okay, now T2 contains whatever value is multiplied with T1, right? What is the next operation? Plus, right? So what you are supposed to add, whatever T2 you have, that you need to add with ID2. Okay, and let us store it in once again another temporary variable or a register called as T3. Okay, what is the last operation? Last operation is assignment, right? So whatever value of T3 is, you assign that value to ID 1, right? So assign that value to ID 1. Now ID 1 is a memory location. Okay, ID 1 is the memory location. So this is the 3 address code that is generated by the intermediate code generator. Okay, it looks something like this. Now this statement is then translated to the object code. But before that, we may perform some sort of optimization, okay, by what is called as a code optimizer. Like, can we reduce some operation in this? Okay, in this case, the first operation, which is a translation into float, okay, that can be completely avoided if I take, instead of 60, 60.0. Okay, so this is used by our code optimizer in order to perform the following. Okay, so first it will multiply ID3 directly by 60.0. Instead of translating 60 to 60.0 and then multiplying it, it will just store 60.0 in its place, or it will only use 160.0, and then it will multiply that with ID3. Okay, so whatever result we have got, T1, if we assign, see, with, or if we add that with ID2, I will get the result. So instead of using another temporary variable, we can directly store it in ID1. Okay, we can directly store it in ID1. So from 4 instructions, we reduced it to 2 instructions, right? So we already know that executing 4 instructions would actually take more time when compared with executing 2 instructions. So this is the job of code optimizer, right? It will enhance your code to make it better and faster, right? So once this optimization is done, then you can pass it on to the next phase of the compiler, which is called as the code generator. So this will generate your assembly level language code. Okay, so I believe you can generate an assembly level language code for this one, something like what has been shown here. Okay, now you know that assembly level language code generation is completely machine dependent, because assemblers are machine dependent, right? So it would depend upon your assembler. So if you are writing this for SIC bar XC, statements would be completely different, because SIC bar XC only uses one operand, right? But here you can observe there is an assembly level language code generated with 2 operands. Okay, let us check what exactly it is. I hope this is visible. Directly use this. Okay, so what's the code that has been generated? So first operation that is supposed to be performed is multiplication of ID3 into 60, right? So first let us bring that value of ID3 into one of our registers. Let us name that register as R2. Okay, so load the floating point number into R2 the value of ID3. Okay, so whatever ID3 value is, so that will be loaded into R2. Okay, then I need to multiply that with 60. Okay, so 60 is an immediate operand, so we'll use hash 60.0 and R2. R2 is nothing but ID3, right? So we'll multiply that. So to multiply that, we will use mulf, multiply floating point number. The result will be stored in R2 only. So this is the destination. Okay, so for this particular operation, this is the destination. So R2 and 60 will be multiplied, and the result will still be stored in R2. Okay, so next what we are supposed to do, we need to bring in ID2. Of course, R2 is already occupied with the result, so I will not use that register. We will use one more register. So LDF R1 into ID2. Okay, so ID2 gets loaded into R1. Now what I need to do, just need to add R1 and R2. Okay, so one operand, second operand added together. right? So we'll add both of them, and we will store the result in R1, okay, using add, right? So this part is done. So now the result has to be stored in ID1. So you need to move or store, correct? So use the operations store, STF, what, this is the destination, this is the source, okay? So from the content of R1, contents will be moved to ID, right? So this is the code that has been generated. Now further these can be optimized, okay? Remember, further these can be optimized. So 1 2 3 4 5 instructions are there. So instead of 5 instructions, if you can perform some sort of optimization again, then you can, like for example here we have to bring in everything into register and then perform the operation. Suppose if the machine, target machine, supports memory to memory operation, like directly you can add one content from memory into another. So in that case you can have less than 5 instructions to accomplish this operation, right? So this is how the translation is going to take place. Now from here you know how things go, right? So if you get an assembly level language program, you know how to convert this assembly level language program into machine language. Okay, so this is how your program is going to be translated in different phases by the assembler. Okay, so this is what the explanation is for different phases of the compiler. Okay, so you are supposed to look into other aspects, but before that, as I mentioned earlier, the symbol table. So the symbol table is one of the data structure that is going to be used in all the phases of the compiler, or used by all the phases of the compiler. So this is essential to record variable names used in the source program and collect information about various attributes. Okay, because attributes in the sense properties of each name. Okay, because we need to know what type of variable it is, what is its name, okay, what is its length. Okay, so all these information are going to be recorded. So these attributes may provide information about storage allocated for the name, which is nothing but the variable name, its type, what is the type of that, its scope, where exactly it is used. So all that information can be recorded. And in case of procedure names, or if it is a program and it uses functions, then such things are going to be containing things like what is the number and type of the arguments that it is using, what is the method that is used for passing each argument, and what is the value that is returned. So all that information might be recorded in the symbol table. Okay, so the symbol table is a data structure containing the record for each variable name with fields for the attributes of the name. The data structure should be designed to allow the compiler to find the record for each name quickly and store and retrieve the data from the record quickly. Okay, so why? Because constant insertion and search and retrieval is going to be done by the compiler. So if you want to make it faster, you need to use certain data structure which is capable of doing that. And obviously you know that most of the symbol tables have been implemented using hash format, okay, for the purpose of faster search. So this is what the symbol table is, which is used in all the phases of the compiler, right? So this is what the phases of compiler is. So I think next concept that I'm supposed to discuss is okay, grouping of phases, right? So I'll just explain this. Okay, sometimes you can group the phases into passes because the compiler can basically go through the program more than one time. Okay, like for example, as I explained, when syntax analyzer need to analyze the syntax, it would require tokens. Okay, it would require tokens. So as a result, it might call Lexer once again. The Lexer would scan the input, give the token. Okay, so this process is continuous. So you might have to go through the program more than one time, or in other words, it might have to group together certain phases into passes. So this is also one of the option that is available. Okay, so we'll discuss about the compiler construction tools. Is also one of the topic. So these are tools that are used to construct the compiler itself. Okay, like for example, what we have been discussing in the laboratory sessions, which are Lex and Yak. Those are tools, right? So this is also a part of that compiler construction tool. So what are the other type of construction tools other than Lex and Yak? There is a brief description of that. We will discuss about that in the next section, along with the uh, evolution of programming languages. Okay, so why exactly we moved from low level languages to high level language. Okay, so I'll do that in the next session. If you do have any doubts, then you can ask. Otherwise, I will take the attendance. You have to wait for 2 minutes. That's it. Okay, don't leave. Okay, I have taken the attendance. I will also share the attendance sheet with you now. So do fill that up because that is very, very important as well. If you don't have any doubts, okay, if you don't have any doubts, then I'll see you in the next session. Okay. Thank you, students.
Karthi. Okay. So Mithun exit ಆಗೋ